Hello, and welcome to our fourth three-book Friday for Whole Noir. I'm Nick Triplow, writer and co-founder of Whole Noir, and with me is Nick Quantrill, also writer and co-founder. And we'll be asking our guests this evening to choose three books that have most influenced them as readers and writers. And the format, as always, is pretty straightforward. It's a book that's been given to you, a book that you give to somebody else or recommend, and a book that for our writers has been an influence on their work. So I'm going to hand over to Nick. Oh, actually, I should say like and subscribe. That's what you meant to say, isn't it?
Yeah, we always say that. Like and subscribe.
Yeah. And everyone says it. So I'm going to hand over to Nick now to introduce our two authors for this evening.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, we've got two fantastic guests with us again tonight. Excuse me. We have first of all we have Louise Ross. To my left, I don't know if that's if I was going to appear when we actually put it out on YouTube, but we'll see. LGA Ross is an international best-selling author, best known for creating atmospheric mystery and thriller novels, including the DCI Ryan series set in the home turf of Northumbria, and The Curb, the first in a new series of summer suspense mysteries set in Cornwall, which is available now. Louise is also writing several standalone romantic suspense novels featuring strong female protagonists, which will be available in 2021. So you're keeping very busy, Louise. That's what we like. And our second guest is Tim Becker. Tim was born in Sydney, and his debut novel, the JFK-themed noir thriller Fever City, was published in 2016 and went on to be shortlisted for the CWA's John Creasy New Blood Dagger. Tim lives in the south of France and has worked on film projects in India, China, Mexico, Brazil, and Australia. His latest book, the narco-epic City Without Stars, is published by Faber. So good to have you both along with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. So we'll kick off with the first category then, which is a favourite book that was given to you. So let's start with you, Louise. You've chosen a book I wasn't particularly aware of, but it was one I kind of knew it'd been a TV series, hasn't it? About maybe going back 30 plus years now. But tell us a little bit about your choice for The Far Pavilions by MMK.
Yeah, so this one I first discovered. I remember vividly discovering this book on, I think it was my grandmother's shelf, and she ended up giving it to me. And yes, The Far Pavilions by MMK. And I think the thing that first attracted me to it was actually the cover. It's always, the book is sold by the cover, but it ended up being this real adventure story. So it's actually about 1,000 pages long. It's not a short story by any means, but it's just a sweeping epic adventure. And it's very much a mixture of genres. I would say it's coming of age, it's adventure, it's romance, it's also a little bit of intrigue and suspense mingled in there. And it's basically all set during the last days of the Raj in India. So it's written by MMK, who lived out there for a lot of her life. At the time, it was, her husband worked for the military over there. She spoke several of the dialects herself, and grew up as the daughter of a military family as well who'd served in India. So I think you can really feel that authenticity and that love for the country kind of coming through on every page. And I think as somebody who had never visited India, saw it as a very different culture to, at that stage when I was 11 discovering this book, being in the northeast of England, it's a very sheltered environment, and also, reasonably monotone in many things that it does, much as I love it. I wouldn't say that at that stage in the 1980s and 90s, it was necessarily very diverse in the northeast of England. So to discover a book like that and to maybe see India through the eyes of that author was just a real fantastic experience for me. And I couldn't put the book down, and I think part of that really was the texture. You really felt like the smells and the sounds and the geography, everything about it was so rich. And I felt that for her, it must have been a labor of love writing it. As you say, there was also the television production in the 1980s. At least said soonest mended about the television. But I think it's very hard when you've really loved something, spoken like a true reader there, Many of my readers say now, I don't know that I want to see yours on TV after all, because actually it wouldn't be how it is in my mind's eye. And I think I understand that, because I really loved this novel so much, and I come back around to it maybe every 5 years and pick it up again. And I think that probably, although this is a slightly different category of the book that you asked me to pick, it's also influenced me in a way, because I thought if I can recreate that sort of ability to transpose my understanding of a setting onto the pages for someone who's never visited the Northeast, say, then that's a real win. And I think that reading that book was the start of that journey. So
yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting that you say you go back to it. You get something different from it on each reread as a reader and a writer, do you think?
Yeah, I think so, because, you know, first picking up that book at 11, and it is an adult book, you know, it's not a children's book.
Yeah.
You see it through different eyes, don't you? It's like watching certain films or you know, actually watching The Simpsons, you know, don't you think a lot of that writing is for the adults in the room?
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
that's the same with this novel, you know, now I pick it up and I see so much more about the kind of historic flavor that she was trying to convey in terms of the political tensions at the time in India. And being largely ignorant when I first picked that up now, it's not only that she's encouraged me to find out more about that history, it also puts a completely different slant on things. So yes, and also this was India before, you know, parts of the Northern Territory became different areas of Afghanistan and things like that. So, you know, this was at a really unique moment in history when she was writing, and I think she's done quite well to, you know, still be relevant. I think it's a book that's largely forgotten, but I do recommend to people to read. Obviously, portions of it wouldn't stand the test of time in terms of dialogue, perhaps, but the content, I think, is still quite relevant. So, yeah.
Excellent. Is it a book you're familiar with, Tim? Have you read it?
No, I haven't, but I was, of course, familiar with the TV show when it came out. I never saw it, but it was there everywhere. It was very omnipresent. But no, to tell you the truth, back sort of when I was still in Australia, it's the kind of book I wouldn't have wanted to have read, because I had it in for the British Empire, basically, you know, so I didn't want to. But it's exactly the kind of book that now I would really be interested in exploring. So I'm definitely going to look into it.
Yeah, I think it's a book that probably you can kind of transpose to your own work with City Without Stars, because that's about a very different culture in Mexico, isn't it? And it views the kind of society from, you know, from the bottom to the top, doesn't it? And has that kind of epic tweak to it. So I think, you know, that's something that's kind of, you know, it works really well in crime fiction, doesn't it? You know, as Louise was talking, I was thinking about particularly someone like Abdi Mukherjee's work, you know, how that kind of takes that time period in a slightly different way, but does very similar things.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's like it's a moment that's arrived again.
Yeah.
And so,
So your choice then, Tim, is The Manchurian Candidate by Richard Condon. Sorry, yeah. So tell us a bit about that book. Again, I think it's one of those kind of that, you know, from the screen, maybe more from the book for a lot of people, possibly.
Exactly, and that's how this story began, because I was 7 or 8 years old. During that time in my life, I was sick a lot of the time. I wasn't going to school, so I didn't learn to read till I was 8. But the benefits were that I was the only one of the 5 brothers who was able to stay up late. And one night I watched this Late Show, and it was an incredibly bizarre film. I'd never seen anything like it, where these US soldiers are walking through the forest and the jungle, and then next minute they're in what looks like a TV studio, and then they go back and forwards, and they were acting as though there was no jump in the narrative at all. And then later on, there were people walking around wearing suits made out of cards and stuff like that. So I was trying to process this all. I was watching it with my mother at the time, and I had so many questions to ask. But the first question I asked was, "Mum, what's an nymphomaniac?" And she said, "Ask me when you're 21. Fast forward like 12, 13, 14 years. It's my 21st birthday at the end of the night. Everyone's leaving. And my mother came up to me and she said, "Do you have a question for me?" And I said, "What's an nymphomaniac?" And then she handed me this book. Unfortunately, the original copy is still in Australia, but I picked this one up about 12 or 14 years ago. When I first read it, when I was 21 then, I was really perplexed by it the way I was when I saw the film, and I had a problem too with the humor in the first 50 pages. I found it, I don't know, a little bit grating. But later on, when I was starting this novel about JFK's assassination and everything, I thought I should go back to this book again. So I read it again, and I was blown away by it. And this whole idea of a shadow narrative in American politics and American society. And I really found, of course, I was too young even when I was 21 to pick up the parallels with the Kennedy assassination, everything that was happening in the 1960s. But I felt a little overwhelmed too, because so many of the things that would have seemed bizarre back in the 1960s now sort of seem par for the course, you know. And I love this book because it is so far out there and yet it's so close to reality. And it's a very difficult kind of act to juggle those two things. And when I read a book like The Manchurian Candidate that I really love, I often go for a nonfiction book too. And just to recommend the nonfiction version of it is Chaos. It's an extraordinary book. And everything that seems far-fetched in The Manchurian Candidate actually was happening from the late 1950s in places like Fort Detrick, or as my French friends call it, Fort Detrick. And it is kind of a lot of Detricks going on there, you know, all this dirty, funny business going on. So mind control was definitely institutionalized on a secret level within the US military and also with the FBI, with the Quantrill program as well. And who knows if it's still going on, but it's a fascinating read, and it also exposes you to the kind of manipulation that we're getting right now. It's entrenched on a personal level in The Manchurian Candidate, but it's there, this whole idea of direction, manipulation, coercion, and triggering, a popular verb these days, triggering reactions in people. We're seeing it all the time here, all around the world.
It does come to something, doesn't it, when dystopian fiction sort of fuses into social realism and you suddenly realize you're in that place that you didn't think you'd ever get to.
That's right. It's like reading 1984 and 1948, I guess, you know, saying what a great read, but a little bit far-fetched. And then later on you say, my God.
Is it a book you're familiar with, Louise? Have you read that one? Have you read The Manchurian Candidate?
No, I've seen the movie, but as Tim was talking there, I'm definitely inspired. But I mean, I always feel as a writer slightly embarrassed admitting when you've seen the movie version of something.
Yeah.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, but I always feel terrible when I think I didn't get to the book first, but it sounds brilliant.
And your second choice, Louise, is a novel that's also an incredible film, and as an adaptation, it's probably one that most people are familiar with. Do you want to tell us about why you'd recommend or why you'd give somebody The Remains of the Day?
Oh, The Remains of the Day. I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I think whenever I'm pressed or put on the spot, I mean, it's one of the first books that just comes to my mind, because every time I pick it up without fail, you know, it's just such an enjoyable read. I mean, what I mean by that is that as a reader, you're not interrupted. You don't feel at any point that in the prose there's something clunky or disorganized, or, you know, it's just so beautifully written, you know, even apart from the themes. And before we get into all of that, you know, just in terms of how it was written, for me at least, it just feels so smooth. You know, it's like having a fine glass of wine, you know. So it's like, that's kind of the best way to describe it. So that's the first thing, which I think is such a skill, because, you know, I think it's something we all aspire to, and we're trying to work on that to get there. But certainly with this book, I mean, what a triumph, you know, to be able to pen that, because really it doesn't waste words either. You know, when you look at it paragraph by paragraph, if you go back over it, having read it several times now, and look at it with an even more analytical eye, you know, even looking at the prose like that, it's just so simple and it's so effortless. So that's the first thing that I would say about it that I love, just as an exercise. But then the actual content, the themes are so interesting to me. So, you know, there's that element of restraint, you know, and I think that there've been a few different books like that have touched me in that way. So things like Where Angels Fear to Tread and things like that, there's that social restraint that's discussed, and they're trying to convey that through the pages. But I think it's a real success story with The Remains of the Day, kind of really talking about the downfall of the British aristocracy. And, you know, they're talking about that sad decline, and, you know, certainly sad for some anyway. And, you know, that sort of that slow and inevitability that we can see coming as a reader. And again, that's such a skill, because, you know, you make the reader feel part of something whilst also standing apart from it, because you know what's coming, but these characters are still fighting it. You know, they're still fighting that inevitability. So there's a sort of an interesting sensation as you go through as the reader reading it. But then apart from that, it's this sense of, I think, dignity, you know, that real dignity that Stevens the butler has all the way through, that is both laudable, but then at the same time, you know, his double-edged sword, you know, and couldn't ever break free from his own sense of dignity like that, even when it was necessary and would have perhaps been advisable. So all of those themes, I think, pulling so much of it together was such a feat. So you feel like at the end of reading this, you've had a real tapestry of a man's life. And obviously seeing it through the eyes of the character as well, I think was so well done, because you know, writing in the first person is difficult, I think, at the best of times. So to be able to do it with such prowess was, you know, something that I really enjoy every time.
It is a stunning piece of writing, and in terms of the kind of use of language, I mean, I used to read a lot more literary fiction, I think, in those days, and I just remember just the pleasure of sitting there reading that novel. And you're right, it's a fast read, really.
Yeah.
Have you read it, Tim?
Yeah. I think that Louise put, when she said restraint, I thought that was exactly the kind of word that engenders my reaction to this novel. But I found it a very harrowing and sad read when I read it. And I said earlier that I didn't like reading about the British Raj or the Empire, stuff like that. This is the exact kind of opposite. This is the other end, and the empathy that you feel for him is immense, and therefore the sorrow that you also feel, you experience. So it's a book that weighs on you, I think, a lot. It weighed on me a lot, but it's also an amazing read. It's so beautifully written, and the tone is just perfect. I think that it's one of the best examples of a tone perfect book that I've read.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And I think that goes for your choice as well, as a book that you'd recommend or give, a novel that certainly strikes a tone from early on and doesn't let up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you've chosen the book that you've chosen?
This book is The Talented Mr. Ripley, and this is the book that I give to people for several reasons. First of all, I give it to people who come to visit me because a lot of the story is set down here near San Remo, in between San Remo and Cannes, and also in a mythical town that's south of Naples that I assume is the Sorrento coast, you know, Amalfi or somewhere like that. So it has the tone of this sunny place for shady people that I live in. And certainly there's a lot of shady people in this book. And when I was a kid, my dad used to manage a stadium, an indoor stadium. They would have boxing matches and the roller derby and rock and roll concerts and stuff like that. But the thing I really loved to go and see was the World Championship wrestlers. And I loved it because of the villains. And when you're 8 or 9 years old and you see someone who is going against everything you're taught at school is good and is best behavior, it's kind of it's a shock, but it's also a little bit of a release as well. And I think that all of us are drawn to great villains. And I think that Tom Ripley is up there for me as one of the great crime villains of all time. I know there's people who say Dr. Hannibal Lecter is there and, you know, whoever. Or a lot of other people would probably say Deputy Sheriff Ford. he's pretty much up there as well. But what I like about Tom Ripley is he's a villain with nuance. And also, he's the kind of villain, almost all of us know someone who is more or less Tom Ripley, you know, in a moderated kind of way. But we, you know, the lack of concern that he has for other people, the self-centeredness, the no empathy for humans at all, the inability to see how his own acts impact upon the lives of not the people that he's targeting, but other people around him. Well, this is really quite similar to a lot of the politicians that we have today as well. So I often wonder if maybe this isn't a good book to give to people because maybe it gives them ideas. And who knows if politicians in the United States and Australia and the UK, just to name a couple of countries, they weren't given this on their 12th or 13th birthday. I hope not. But also what I like is, and I think oftentimes today people talk about how there's definitely a debate about whether men should write about women and whether women should write about men. And I think when I look upon my favorite villain, Tom Ripley, written by a woman, and also my favorite hero from police or from crime novels is Hercule Poirot. It's a good example of two incredible, unforgettable men who are written by women. It just goes to show, I think, that what counts most of all is the imagination. And I was talking about a lack of empathy from Tom Ripley, but these writers who have empathy for their characters, you know. And Patricia Highsmith, I know she had a pretty tough life. She struggled with alcoholism. She struggled a lot with financial problems, and her career went up and down. But the empathy she has for Tom Ripley is quite amazing, to have empathy for this person who is on one level so cold that he's vicious, and on another level he's so human and he just wants to get ahead, and he's just doing whatever it takes for him to get to the best hotel, as he says at the end of the book, you know. So I think it's an amazing book. It's also a great introduction to people who haven't read much crime as well. It's a psychological thriller crime.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Louise, is it a book that you've come across?
Sorry.
Is it a book that you've come across that you've read?
Oh yeah, no, it's definitely one of my favorites as well. And echo everything that Tim just said, really. I mean, it's such a, well, I think having that kind of observational talent to be able to look at a person, maybe bring together lots of different strands from many people that you might have seen in real life, and be able to create this character that expresses so much of that is a skill. And it's just the psychology. I think it's, you know, it's just that everyday psychology that she's been able to look at that and put it on a page, I think is, yeah, it's right. Because as you say, we all know somebody with shades of that, you know, and that's the skill, and that's why you relate to an anti-hero as much as a hero.
Yeah,
exactly. Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent. And it's another one that kind of has become a great hit on the screen as well as a book, isn't it, as well? So that's another excellent choice. So our third category is a book that has influenced your own writing. And this is a brilliant choice, Louise, that you've chosen, because I think it's one that your readers wouldn't necessarily automatically connect to your writing. But when I kind of sat down and thought about it, I could kind of understand why. But I won't say any more than that. So you introduced the book that's influenced your writing that you've chosen for us, which is The Killer Inside Me by Jim Thompson.
Yeah, so I've always been a fan of the kind of American hard-boiled thrillers and that kind of fiction. And I think the reason is that they don't waste words, so they convey a lot. I mean, incidentally, it's the same reason why I like Graham Greene. You know, I love Brighton Rock, and I think that there's a certain style that these writers have which really resonated with me when I first picked them up, and still does. Because certainly looking back to when I wrote my first book, as much as I'm still proud of it, I think that any writer would say that it's a game of continuous improvement, and you want to try to never stand still and always improve. And looking back on the first effort, you know, I think there's a sense of indulgence that you allow yourself, as much as you try to be, try to be the best you can be. You are indulgent, you know, you're setting up your characters, you say things with maybe 5 more words than you need to, you know. And reading Jim Thompson, I think from the very first page, you're immersed in this small town America, and this manipulative, sociopathic character that he creates. So, you know, to be able to grab someone, there's a lesson straight away. You know, you're grabbed from the first line and the first page. And that's something that certainly writing in the genre that I write in, you know, you have to do that. And I think I would want to always do that. Moreover, you know, that's something as a reader, I enjoy being grabbed and pulled in. Much as I appreciate slow burn novels, I think that my preference is to really just fall straight in there and not really feel that you come up after that, or be able to at least put it down, but then fall straight back in. And that's, you know, a skill with every page. So it isn't just that he's done that for show on the first page. It is a style that follows all the way through. And that really carries you on. So the book is not a long one either. And I think that probably in the same way that MMK managed to do this with a much longer book, the similarity between them was that they managed to write in such a way that they held you. There were no paragraphs where you thought this is filler, you know, or you could sense that there was a lag. The pacing was just right. And That's really what I love about that novel. But moreover, it comes back to the same reason that Tim was talking about the talented Mr. Ripley. I think there's that psychology that comes through, you know, and I think that as much as I think writers are generally observational people. You know, we look at the world around us and it's what we do. You know, we try to put that down on a page in characters and create these fictional people. I think that, you know, looking at Jim Thompson, he just really had a very effortless ability to be able to do that. And certainly with this novel, it's interesting that when it made it to the screen, it was a lot more graphic. And I think the book necessarily intends, I mean, there are scenes in the book, but I think a lot of the beauty of reading it is really that you can just imagine that yourself to whatever degree, you know. And he is a vicious character, there's no doubt about it. But I think, you know, it's what's not said is the better part of that novel.
A very powerful first-person narrative, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one of the best examples of a first-person killer monologue, really, certainly. For me.
Yeah, I assume you've read the book, have you, Tim? You're nodding along there like you know it quite well.
Yeah, no, I've read the book, and I think what Nick just said then about the first-person narrative, it's true, because I think it's really hard to write a first-person narrative from the point of view of a psycho, you know, and make it real. But I also think with Louise, what she was saying, it's true that he paints a portrait that's absolutely convincing from the very beginning. And that's one of the most terrifying things about the book, is you can absolutely believe. You believe in the setting you taste it and smell it, and you feel the grit in your eyes. So you believe the setting, you believe the people, and then you have trouble believing what he's doing too, but you do. So it's really convincing, and I haven't seen the film versions. I don't think I want to, especially after what Louise said about being more graphic, because the tone is so graphic in itself. The book is such an assault that you don't need to go into gruesome details. The detail is the man who's telling you the story, and that's enough, you know. So yeah, it's definitely, I think, probably out of the hard-boiled novels that I've read. Of course, there's books like the Hunter novels, and but it stands out, and it's a very uncomfortable read. I have to say that it's a great read, but it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah, I agree. And so your choice then, Tim, is a slightly surprising one. I thought maybe I was expecting you to pick maybe a kind of noir novel as well as being one that influenced you, but you picked something very different. So I'll let you explain it, because obviously I've had an 80s education in Northern England, so I know nothing about it particularly. I will hand it over to you.
Okay, so the question is, you know, the book that you give and the book that you received and stuff like that. And the book that influenced me, I wanted to be honest about it. And I was going to choose the first 49 stories, because that was the first hardback novel or book that I ever bought. And I still have that copy with me. That influenced me a lot when I was about 14 or 15. But then I went back and I thought, okay, well, there's no way you can really, I guess you could say part of it is noir. But I went back to the book that made a huge impact on me after I started to learn to read. I started reading little picture books about the Greek gods, and I really got into Mount Olympus and all that kind of stuff. And that led me to Patrick Moore's books about astronomy, the connection between the stars and the gods and everything. And then when I was about 10 or 11, I started reading Homer. And I went through many different versions, and I was immersed. This is the and a lot of people would criticize me because it's the prose version, it's not the verse version, but it was the one that really captivated me. And in a way, I think, Nick, we could say it's a crime novel. Like you could argue that book is the template for The Godfather. When you look at all the families of the Greeks that get together and the wars between them, even before they set out to Troy. But I just thought it was a huge mass of humanity, and there were so many interesting characters in it. What I loved about it is you follow all the major characters, but the secondary characters have whole worlds themselves, and they were the ones that sort of captivated me the most. People like Cassandra and her curse that she is the only person there who can tell the truth and no one will listen to her. And that's a great, it didn't have an influence on me as a kid, but looking back at it now, that's a great thing for writers and for journalists to think about. And also Priam and his family, one thing I started to uncover over the years, going back to it, was just this amazing relationship between Hector and Paris, the two brothers. And I think so many family sagas can be traced back to the Iliad, and also, and so many family sagas do involve crime, when people crack and they can't put up with something and they go for a gun or a knife or a club or something like that. So I can't judge. I've never read the original in ancient Greek, but the translation I read just immersed me in the story. And I also loved the relationship between the gods and the mortals, because I was brought up in a Catholic school, and it was always sort of like a one-way street. You pray to God, and if you're lucky, God will help you or not. What was amazing for me was seeing this interaction between mortals and gods, and also getting back to villains, how bad so many of those gods behave. Like you could subtitle it, gods behaving badly, the things that they do to each other, and to just for spite, just out of boredom, and the way they destroy mortals' lives. And what I really admired is the way the mortals try and fight back. It's a pretty uneven kind of playing field, but they give as much as they get. So I just thought, as a template for sort of like life, we get stuck with stuff. What do? Well, the human nature is you fight back, and you try and get through it alive, and you try and get through it better. And if you have an opportunity to maybe kick over some god's altar and offer a blood offering to that god's rival, you do it,
Excellent. Is there something you're familiar with, Louise? Have you had a chance to read the book? Or the
Yes,
prose?
I read a lot of classical fiction and classics in general when I was young. So I would say that I haven't touched it in quite a few years, because time has unfortunately marched forward without me realizing it. But but when I was younger, yes. And I think that, just picking up on what Tim was saying there, one of the major themes for me with reading something like the Iliad is the sense of pathos. Just in every story, there's such a pathos to it. It'd always be the good guy who gets it in the neck, and there's that real, I think, coming out of the Iliad, it teaches you a really important lesson about life. I think that when I was younger, I always used to say, but that's not fair. There's right and there's wrong. That's not fair. Why is that outcome happen? And someone said to me, well, life isn't fair, Louise. And actually, you read something like the Iliad, and it teaches you that lesson as you come through. It's just about making the best of a situation, and whatever situation you find yourself in, whether that be
Yeah, and I think that filters through the crime fiction, doesn't it? As we've discussed essentially there. So I think that's a great choice. I think we have to wrap it up there, don't we? We're going to run out with time very shortly.
Yeah, that's a great note to end it on. Brilliant.
Smashing. So thank you very much to Louise and for Tim for sharing those books with us. Fantastic choices. I think everybody will be getting hammered in the bookshops again after watching this. And we'll be back next month with another Free Book Friday. So once again, thank you, Louise. The Cove's out, I believe, end of July. The first of the new series. New book coming from you, Tim, very soon?
Hopefully, yes.
Fantastic.
Nothing official yet, but we're waiting for an announcement soon.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. So thank you very much. Thank you as well, Nick. We'll catch you all soon.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks to you. See you. Bye.